your very best. If you can describe in as much detail as you can. We'll get Sue to introduce you to the larger group, your research proposal for in around sort of half an hour mark, which will give us enough opportunity to ask questions and open up the floor to questions, whether that be online or face-to-face. But yeah, feel as though you're in a safe space. I know that you do a lot of work in here on a Friday with a lot of the HCR students in the room, so yeah, I might hand over to Sue to introduce you more intimately, and then we'll get started.
Well, I think we're all amongst friends here, really, aren't we? We're all here because we know Joanne, and we have tremendous respect for her work and for her integrity as a colleague and a person. We've also got Michelle Hogue online here, and Michelle, we're just delighted to have you. Michelle's in Canada. She's a Native American woman who's also on Joanne's panel. So, and Curtis Roman, hi Michelle. And Curtis Roman is also a Larrakia senior person. He's also on her supervisory panel with me. So we've got guidance across this space, and we're all tremendously interested in the work that Joanne is sharing with us today and what she hopes to achieve. So welcome Michelle, and thank you Joanne, thank you Gavin, and Guziel here is on the COC panel as another person.
Okay, I really want to thank you all for coming. I'm actually more nervous than I thought I would be. I even forgot my login this morning. Sorry, I'm sitting down. I hope you don't mind. But thank you, everybody. So, this, I guess, is the point in time with the COC that launches into the research that hopefully will happen. It's about articulations of allyship in Indigenous higher education, but specifically within the Northern Territory context. It's qualitative, but it's about the impact of the ally experiences in the in-between spaces. And those in-between spaces I've come to think of as prime real estate for teaching and learning, rather than somewhere to quickly get through or get over or get into the next step, because just from the teaching and learning in higher education space, it's where the students and the educators too find some really strong identity connections and anchors for their ongoing journey. This is really important to me, the acknowledgement of country. It's actually it's one I put together and had it endorsed by Auntie Billawara Lee for my Masters. And I had a look at it, and I was going to do it, revise it, but it's still relevant. The teary. This is for the people that aren't here anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't expect that. On Larrakia country, as I work, live, study and play. I acknowledge the value, diversity, integrity and knowledge of the Larrakia people. Thank you for being here, Darren. And their ancestors, who guide us all in the special place of the land and the sea, with the light steps and ancient footprints as they track into the Milky Way. I've got tissues, I didn't think me. Quite the unexpected. Who would have thought? There we go. All right, now to this mouse. All right, I'm very fortunate with my supervisors. I've got Dr. Sareka Smith, who's here today and on the panel, who guided me with a little trepidation, I'm sure, through the Masters of Education Global Learning. But I found that there were some threads there to continue into the PhD, and I was really honoured when she said yes to the next step. Also, Dr. Michelle Ho, who I've worked with over the last, oh gosh, it must be 5, nearly 6 years now, in the PTS program, where we've connected our students who've had conversations, and we've written together, and I've learnt such a lot from her as a colleague. And Dr. Curtis Roman, who I hold in great esteem. He was also a person here at CDU when he worked here that I could go to and ask any questions, especially the difficult ones. So I'm very fortunate that he's a supervisor as well. So, who am I? So I've been working in education from early childhood through to higher education for quite some time, and in some strange and interesting places. I've been really lucky. Even though I've been there as a capacity as an educator, I feel that I'm the one that's been the privilege of learning so much from so many people, and that it's really been a relational journey wherever I am. There's some contexts that aren't here, but Alma, this is our special group here. This was when I first came to Canilda, and this is a young lady that taught me a lot. There's some cheeky men and PTS that ongoing with their studies. This is in Year 7, teaching English, which I love. Another group, an amazing young man who's taught me a lot of patience and also traditional knowledge connections and how to work in different ways. And Travis, who I connected with at the mentoring program at the barracks. I got asked to go and do a workshop there and shape that around allyship. So that was a surprise, it was great. And Angelina, who's very much my teacher, and she's going to be going into linguistics. This young man, fantastic, Norbert, I still have his reindeer. Christmas hanging thing for the Christmas tree. He taught me a lot. A lot of these students were from Baralula. In Thailand with early childhood. Working with the nuns in very remote Thailand. I didn't have the betel nut. This is in East Timor. This is working with the young men of Torres and East Timor, which Anne-Marie's familiar with. We were doing some English classes there, and they just let me paint with them. So that was wonderful. And some of the early relationships from Canilda have continued into adulthood. I occasionally get a miss screaming across Casuarina, and it's this young lady all grown up with her own children. So yeah, it's wonderful. But it is all about the relationships. Here we're making flying pig money boxes. But it was all about learning through the doing, which I'm better at and which I've learned is the best way for Indigenous methodology around engaging in new concepts. Okay, relationships foundational to the research. I've actually written something down here. So, Pidge and Archibald and Hawking, they state relationships in research and higher education matter. And they do matter. And that's what this research is about. But although there's evidence about this in the literature, it's not believed or considered to be a prominent informant, particularly around decision making and policy. So building on relationships in the decolonial process of the research with participants, one of my colleagues, or ex-colleague, sounds like an ex, Lisa Hall, has actually used something called interrupting tools. So I've appropriated that in a good way in conversation with her and asked, can I use your ideas around the interrupting tools and develop them into my methodology? So we're going to have some ongoing conversations about that. But it's all to work, ways of working within that intercultural framework. Particularly, it's about working in good faith in those relationships. And this is, I guess, brought to the surface by Vering with the inclusion of interrupting tools and critical race theory to frame and bolster the decolonising process. Research practice, I've had the good fortune to work with Michelle Ho, but the project was the Bridging Cultures Over Under. And this is one of Michelle's classes in Canada, and here we are. We all connected in. Are you there, Carla? Yes, you are. And interestingly enough, a lot of the connection and the bringing together was around food, and that was a practice that I guess we used here, but it was also used in Michelle's classes in Canada, and I had the good fortune to go over there and got to work closely with her students. There's me, I'm the big blue bubble in the middle. But it's also the place where I learnt about the residential schools and the impact on students. This gentleman was part of that residential schools experiment. Legacy, I guess, and not in a good way. Paralleling back to Australia, we had a lot of conversations about policy, mission schools, people being removed from their land into unfamiliar places, being the subject of governance, being without rights, and education being used as a weapon. So that's why this allyship for me is critically important in the research, but based around the relationships. There's a quote we came up with from one of our papers. It is within these intersecting liminal spaces that there is a great possibility to develop relationships, have ethical and open conversations, and come to places of ethical and equitable learning through two-eyed seeing and both ways. So two-eyed seeing is a theoretical framework of looking through one lens with a Western perspective from people's own lens, of their Indigenous, of their Indigenous way of knowing and understanding the world. There's a lot coming up in the literature and in public media right at the moment about allyship, who you are not, and who you propose yourself to be. A lot of it's negative. And a lot of it's used in activist discourse. And it's very much connected to critical race theory. Interestingly, critical race theory in the States, I actually found this with Bronwyn yesterday, on the 22nd of June in the United States, they wanted critical race theory to be excluded from the school's curriculum. And this is in the wake of Black Lives Matter. That date marked Pauline Hanson stating, we are not to have critical race theory in the Australian curriculum, where the Australian curriculum is right at this moment rewriting the narrative or the truth of Indigenous Australia. So I will leave you to ponder that question because it's a big one. And I think it's very important in the context of allyship. So this research comes at a time when race relations are very much being redefined. So in America, who we seem to follow still, the Black Lives Matter movement expressed allyship prolifically in popular media. And it is most prevalent as a charter for social anti-racist activism. And all of these references are mainly 220, 221, some coming from 217, as early as 215, but that's it. It's very much a restructuring of allyship in this space. So there was a highlighting of the power of Twitter during COVID-19 on the impact of the death of George Floyd by the hands of police on the disenfranchised. And the ensuing protests and graffiti, they became a democratising force for people without power to express their own narratives. And that's from Capelli 2000. So this presents an opening to address systematic and institutional racism with care, as there is also a scathing offensive to call out performative white allyship. And this is Herresford and McClanahan, and that's this year. So I will go through this because I think it's really important. I think it's a pivotal historical moment, time, okay. So Black American resistance, it's really flamed the collective Indigenous political and social action which has been echoed in Australia. And even during COVID, thousands marched to change Australia Day, Invasion Day, chanting Black Lives Matters. Now there's a call to truth-telling, very much, which has swept the world in different iterations, from first in South Africa, I think. I'll have to look more information on that. And more recently in Canada, with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And the Declaration of Indigenous Peoples of the rights of Indigenous peoples and the politics of recognition in Australia, but around the world. Okay. This is why this research is important. How do we sit in the Northern Territory? How do we work with students effectively, but work with each other effectively, keeping the students central to the process? The rationale, unqualified iterations, Indigenous allyship. This choice and agency very much founds what I believe for everybody. But these voices aren't here, the voices of Indigenous students in their getting started and keeping going narratives. And this I love, Martin's from Canada. We need to reshape the nature of the questions we ask. And I think at this pivotal time in history, time is light. Okay. Thank you again to Benjamin. The broad and primary research question, how can allyship and teaching and learning enable Indigenous student success in higher education? Now I'm looking at phenomenology as one of the key methods, and it does encourage the researcher to keep the primary research question broad enough to explore in depth. There's some subsidiary research questions there. This is a little cluttered, but basically I had a look at an issue to design the question. And this is just an example of what that might look like. So this is about policy in contested spaces, which will be viewed through a critical race theory lens. How allyship is experienced. What does it look like, sound like, and feel like? And how do the participants perceive their contribution to this research? So they get a really active input in what they want to say. And we will explore that together. All right, now for the pretty model. So the methodology. This has taken a lot of forms. It started with phenomenology, IPA, interpretive phenomenological analysis, I can even spell it now. It went all the way around to grounded theory. But the problem with grounded theory was, even though, this may or may not generate theory, you can't start research without having some preconceptions about what you're going to do, from my perspective. So we came back to phenomenology. So we explored all of those options. The relationships essential to everything. The critical race theory is the lens. And this is interesting, the auto-ethnographic voice. That's me. And I travel around that and in between that space. So I'll be telling the story because I'm part of the story, and this is my experience. This is the point to where it's brought me. These little bubbles, these are all the little interrupting tools. Now, I don't know what they're going to look like because I'm going to co-develop them with the participants. Now, if somebody's feeling uncomfortable, we might develop a set of keywords or indicators or something that says, I want to look more into that, or I feel uncomfortable talking about that. Can we talk about that another day? So that's going to be developed. And that sits very much with that decolonising process as well. So they are also going to be working with me to be checking on my reflexivity, that I'm conscious of my own bias in the process. Okay, I'm pretty sure, how's the time? So, just coming back here, I won't read all my notes, but coming back here, I think it's really important to just briefly mention and the Indigenous research methodologies, and Sean Wilson as well with the Indigenous research methodology. So I sent an email to Professor Rigney in 2015 and I said, this is what I'm doing with my masters. Can I use your guided framework if I'm not Indigenous as a researcher? And he said yes. So I'll be checking in with him, but I'll also be combining Wilson's practices as well. Okay. Now, who are the people? So I'm looking at inviting 20 participants all up, 2 groups. One group is the Indigenous students that I've worked with and or have an ongoing relationship with and who have attended CDU. And that could also be through the partnership with Batchelor Institute, because it's Batchelor Institute where I work. And has given me a lot of navigation for this process. The other group are the academic educators that I've had a connection with, and connection with the education of Indigenous students in the Northern Territory. But they may also be Indigenous. Now the invitations will be sent out with a plain language statement of the research. I won't go too much into this, time not permitting. But basically, instead of looking at the phenomenology as a descriptive process, I've looked at it as the step further with the analysis to give rigour to the study and also to pull out the themes. I've got a little diagram under there I won't show you, but these are the primary people here. This is a very interesting, where are we? How do you say hermeneutics, that's the one. Well, these hermeneutics that in this research are a dance. They're going to be telling their story, how they perceive it, how they feel it, how they remember it. They're going to be interpreting it to me in a way that they think I'm going to understand it. And then I'm going to be interpreting it again in a way that I hear it and feel it. So I'll be needing to check back with my participants, is this actually what you meant to say? And it will be an iterative process. So, yeah, it's a bit like a joyride, that one. Exciting, can't wait. So this is the data collection method. So here we have a semi-structured interview, about an hour. I'm going to create an online forum, 2 different groups, for the 2 different groups of participants through Messenger. I just found through classes that this is an online forum that works well if people want to talk between each other, and we'll set some parameters around that in the ethics. This will inform the next set of conversations, the next data collection, and then I'll be writing and analysing all through here and transcribing. And then the collective arts-based practice, I'll unpack that a little bit further. This is a summative, reflexive practice where we all get together and we have the opportunity to talk about what we've actually done, what we've talked about, what we've explored, what it means to people. And we may talk about metaphors. We may create art. we may create poetry, because a lot of the students that I've worked with love creating art and poetry and looking for lots of different ways to share their understandings. And that's that bit there. That's the whole process of how I'll do the data collection, but I won't go through that today, but if anyone has any questions later. So basically the artistic contribution though, it adds richness and a depth to the data collection. And art creates the possibility of another layer of meaning, of deep meaning, to connect with the issues and the concept through symbolic drawing, to explore experiences, and this is beyond the standard interview. And that's actually validated by Batchelor. The other thing is I'm also trained in artistic therapy and dance therapies. So there will be elements of that throughout the process. Okay, with regards to the construction of the interview, I was fortunate enough to work on as producer for Prevet, which is an online open education resource, and put together the design of the interview. So I'm going to be drawing on those past experiences to inform the research today. The participants will all get the questions in advance, so they have to think about what it's all about and whether they want to participate or select particular questions to talk to. I'll be checking the hermeneutics weaving. And this one here, the reflexive and creative summative process. So there will be a workshop, a separate one, for the students and for the educators, just for confidentiality. And if they want to come. All right. This, I won't go into this. This is just to show the process of analysis. That it is rigorous. Now, what will the data do? So, the data within the framing of Allyship will honour Indigenous voices, centering the students in the research, but also honour the contributions of all academic educated participants and the teaching and learning interface. The data, experiences and thinking on allyship in the Northern Territory here will be analysed after an iterative process of the interviews and arts-based practice. So it's not about singling out individuals, it's about the collective phenomena in the data. And that analysis will inform the framework of Indigenous allyship practice that hopefully self-generates respect, connection and knowledge exploration as a sustainable teaching and learning ecosystem in that in-between space, because that's a really hard space for everybody. Okay, I'll just whiz through this. Timeline. There is a little bit of flexibility there. I've got an extra window here up until March, which is about an extra 5 months, and I'll probably need all of that. Ethics, the big one. So, all going well with the panel. The next step is the ethics, and this is where it gets really interesting. But it is also very, very exciting to do the ethics, because it's going to address why am I the person doing this work, what research priority it addresses, and this is from here. Now, the research priority it specifically addresses is from Closing the Gap, Outcome 6. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students reach their full potential through further education pathways. Now, I'm not even going to pretend to unpack what full potential means, but it might be an interesting talking point in the interviews. Target 6, by 2031, increase the proportion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people aged 25 to 34 years who have completed a tertiary qualification, Certificate 3 or above, to 70%. Now, this research directly connects to higher education students' views on outcomes, behaviours and satisfaction. I will be working with Dr. Curtis Roman, through this process to ensure that I'm addressing, not only addressing, but really doing the best I can do ethically with this process. It's not just a process. For me, it's a living experience, really, for everybody. But it must be done. I don't know what right is, but it must not only address that, but address the criteria in a way that is authentic. And I'll be working with you to do that, with the possibility of setting up an advisory committee of Indigenous around ethics that can inform the process and guide me in the right directions around that, because I am not Indigenous. I would very much like to thank the panel for their time. I particularly want to thank Principal Supervisor Sue Smith for making this all happen and making it happen today. Dr. Michelle Ho for her leadership, encouragement, very detailed editing and suggestions. And Curtis Roman for the rigour and the mentorship around the intercultural space on Larrakia land. I'd also like to thank Maha for being patient with me with last minute finishes to the presentation. Joanne, Robin, everyone actually. My study group on Fridays, keeping everybody on track. And Guzia, for the work with you, it's been amazing. So thank you everybody. Questions? And coffee.
I'm happy to open up to the floor or to Michelle online. I'd just like to firstly state that let's just make sure that the questions are addressed in the right tone and that they're strength-based and the intention behind them is to strengthen a fantastic project. So if we can just keep that in mind, I think that's a nice way to frame this part of the presentation. So with that in mind, Michelle, do you have any questions, being our online person, with this group of people online now?
Not right at the moment. I just wanted to say, Joanne, congratulations. That was fantastic. I guess one of the things that I would like to just ask you is, sort of your perspective on phenomenology.
In what way?
So just, what are you hoping as an ally to come to understand for yourself in this space from a phenomenological end?
As an ally, well, I found the students always talk to me about lived experience, and it's the critical nature of lived experience and how it's not valued in a very Western systematic, any institutions really. And so I want to bring forward those really powerful learnings and knowledges and ways of thinking about the world that we can build on together. But the phenomenology is, I think, a really critical way to elevate and hear and bring forward people's voices that aren't traditionally heard, because from my experience in the spaces, whether it be from early childhood through to higher education, adult education, everybody has an opinion, and particularly being in the Territory, everyone has an opinion on how Indigenous people should be taught. But often the students are not straight from school and have a wealth of knowledge and experience in all kinds of areas. And I think that we have a lot to learn, or I have a lot to learn. And I'm expecting those stories will provide key indicators of what an Indigenous, working within an Indigenous allyship framework might look like.
Thank you. That's great. I just think that allyship is really, sorry about my phone, is key right now. And working alongside rather than, as you said in your presentation, from the top down is key. So thank you for that and for acknowledging it.
Thanks, Michelle. Stephen, do you have a question?
Just maybe one or two. Thanks. Thanks for this presentation. It's beautiful. I appreciate your effort and the supervisor as well. I know you to be a relationship person. You flow with people. That's your nature. That's who you are. Now, I want to see, what are you going to do in terms of your strategy to be able to get enough information from this research? Not just building the relationship, You flow with people, you talk to people, and the student will be happy to engage with you. But what are your strategies to be able to elicit enough data that will help you to articulate your own pedagogy? That's number one.
Can I do number one first?
Quickly.
Or I'll forget. That is a very good question. What I'm going to do, I guess that's why I chose interpretive phenomenological analysis over the descriptive phenomenology, because I'm not just describing a narrative, I'm actually going into the depth of what the participants will share. And a lot of that's going to be strategic questioning. A lot of it will begin with open questioning, and then from the transcription and from the initial analysis, actually identifying some key points there to go back in and explore in greater depth. I have had the comment that from somebody which was really helpful. They said, you can't work with people who you know. they'll tell you what you want to hear. And I thought that was a really valid point. But the reality is they don't tell me what I want to hear. They tell me what they think I need to know. And particularly the students, but also the educators, are very clear on what they want to bring forward in this engagement.
Thank you.
Does that answer the question?
Yes,
It
you
was a
did.
bit
Yeah,
hard.
perfectly well.
Okay.
The second one is just about, I know you're in that space, you understand what I'm about to say, and because I found this happening in my own class, and of course in my engagement with students when I was still a secondary school teacher, especially dealing with, the First Nations, Indigenous people, they tend to communicate to you or with you through other modes of communication, apart from the verbal communication or documenting anything and all that. So are you taking that into consideration as well? That sometimes the gesture might be the response that you need to understand what they're talking about and all that. Are you thinking of that as part of way of getting enough information for your study?
Sorry, can you say that a different way?
Okay. When you talk about communication protocol, you want to get information from your students for your research in process of collecting your data. And by working with indigenous people, there are quite a number of things they do in terms of gestures, using some other non-verbal mode of communication to pass the messages across to you. Are you taking that into consideration when you are collecting your data and using what we call the interpretative and pedagogical approach that you want to use in getting information? I know you are familiar with that space. I just want you to have that at the back of your mind, that they might not, sometimes they might be quiet not to talk to you. They might just do some other things for you to see and to understand their position about your question.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. There is a very particular modes of communication, particularly when somebody does not want to talk about a subject or engage in a conversation or something that is difficult. And what I'm hoping is, well, not what I'm hoping, what I'm going to do is work with the participants on these interrupting tools so that we have an agreed set of codes that address some of those communication, not issues, but I guess ways of communicating when somebody is feeling overwhelmed, or that's not my business, or they just don't want to address that issue, but they're happy to talk about something else in depth. And not all of the interviews will be face-to-face, but they will, so I will use Zoom and record, or some other format. I'll be providing options through that online space where they can communicate together and tease out ideas, and create that comfortable space. And we're going to put some really serious parameters around those spaces ethically. It's also why I'm keeping separate the groups of educator participants and student participants for their emotional safety, but possibly also their progression.
I think also, Joanne, the use of IPA and the art methods are all both chances to capture the communications between, the silence, the body language, maybe particular turns of phrase. It's that iterative process of the phenomenology that where spaces and tone is part of that process, as well as the art and opportunities to experience with art that provide multiple ways of interpreting what people might be communicating besides just purely English language.
The art's really important to me. For example, it's through the art therapy practice, which is a counselling modality, but also through, for example, an art project I had based at a school with over 300 participants, bringing in expert artists called Connections, which was a mental health art project. It was more the medium to provide a communication channel as an alternative, to have a different kind of dialogue and a deeper dialogue about the subject, but in a safe space, and to create art form, whether that be on paper or board, or through sculpture or through poetry.
Thanks,
Before we run out of time, does the panel have a question?
Sarah, did you have a...
I have just one question, and I think Stephen asked it, but then I think that I need to take it to a next level. You asked... Is that on? It's not on? No. Battery's going. No, it's okay. I was trying to understand how you would talk, because we know you as the relationships to be key, but and I was trying to understand how you articulate honour others, and so how do you explain for people who don't know you, people who are reading your research, to say the outsiders that how do you articulate that your relationship will be the key to the difference between people, your participants telling you what you want to hear, and then switching it round to telling you what you need to know. So my question is, how do you convince an outsider that the relationship is the thing that shifts the participatory differential dynamic?
Differential, that's good. I
Yeah,
should write that down.
I wrote it down for you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
No, that's so important, and maybe I can't
That's-
convince them. Maybe I can't convince them at all. I mean, there's a lot of literature on the subject, so I can frame it within the literature. But I think it will present itself in the findings.
Well, see, because I'm just wondering, how do you record what Sue was saying about the paralinguistic, the non-verbal stuff that is actually a very powerful part of the telling rather than the parroting?
Well, the non-verbal communication, that's an entire chapter, Sarah.
Yeah, okay, good.
We'll address it through there.
All right.
It's good, thank you.
I guess
I
field
don't
notes and
know.
so forth will help with that in terms of
Yeah.
topics. Any other questions or comment?
Looks like someone's got their hand up.
Oh, hang on, we've got someone. Sorry.
No,
I don't, is that Joanna? Is that a hand up or?
Yes, it is. Hi.
Hi, Johanna.
Lovely work, Joanne. Can I just say it's a very moving presentation and really great that you didn't try to sew everything up in perfect, tidy bundles, that you're facing this looking forward with a lot of curiosity and a lot of open-mindedness. So I want to say congratulations and thank you. Just off the back of those questions about how are you going to convince the Western academic side of things that these findings you hope to get are generalizable and objective, I just wanted to, consider maybe poke a little bit of the ways that you might interpret some of those beautiful artistic engagements, perhaps with annotations or that kind of reflexivity that you might be able to continue to have a conversation with participants over. But also, too, the ethical questions of how the relational aspect of your work is necessarily not objective. How will you base your discussion of the participatory aspect to it in an effort to kind of meet those Western academic risk-averse considerations?
Well, it's interesting because you've got the scientific method, which says that everything has to be objective in the research. And then you have relationships developed over time through lived experience. And I think this is part of where I sit with the students in some of those cases. So it is going to be part of the intersecting conversations that we have. And also, I believe, generating a couple of papers around that positioning as the participant researcher and what that actually means, because it is open and I don't yet know all the answers.
And I think your research methodology is the strength, and that's the way that will guide you, and that's how you justify your findings, is you've got a really strong methodology and you've justified that.
Agreed.
Yeah, and like moreover, if we think about if we want to understand students' experiences in higher education, well, there's my view, which they probably don't even use, or it's a very blunt instrument, but it's the insider, the known person who's probably in a much better position to have those deeper conversations and experiences, and that'll be probably a strength of the study.
Yeah, you're right.
I realise it is challenging, but it's important. It's important to me. Were there any questions from up back there?
Can I ask a question? Thank you, Joanna, for your presentation. It was really, it's an important area, and I've been involved in the work with you and Michelle. So I guess my question is a simple one, as an Indigenous woman. This was a question that I got asked when I first started my PhD journey, and it was, how will Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people, students or staff, people in general, how will they benefit from your research study? So just in a nutshell.
What I'm hoping the benefits of the research will be is that the students benefit from a different, more collegial way of working with them as experts in their own lives, and that the educators working with them work collegially in allyship for them and beside them as they, find ways to, there's a lot of identity, hybridity in that space, and it's forever evolving and changing and moving. So that we are more secure in our position as navigators, and that we can be a strength and work from a strengths-based practice, whether we're Indigenous or not Indigenous.
Does that refer to this framework of practice that you describe as one of your research aims, to the new knowledge will contribute through the development of a new framework of practice?
It does.
It's a great question, yeah.
Thank you, Robert.
And you might get asked that question when you present it to your participants.
Correct.
Is they will put it back on you and say, well, what's this got? How is this going to help me in whatever area I feel? So just to give you the heads up on that.
Just back on one of those slides, what I really wanted to, what the data will do. Hang on, sorry. Ah, that's all right. I'll find it here somewhere. Excuse me. I think I have too many slides. So it's really about centering the students, but sort of, you know, how do they perceive their contribution to this research, and what do they want heard? What do they want to be important in a framework of working with them?
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Would you
Amazing presentation, Joanne. And we're all happy for you that it's over. You have reached this milestone. This is amazing. And Johanna was right. You put so much of your experience in this bundle, and that's beautiful. And you already have 16,000 words. And if I wanted to simplify it, just completely, extremely simple, extremely simple. If I wanted, am I correct or not? If I wanted to, I'm really happy you have 10 participants and yourself. This is really good because sometimes we want to go hundreds and thousands. This is fantastic. If I was really extremely simplifying it, you will ask students, who was your best ally? You will ask educators, in what cases your allyship worked the best? And then you will put, in my experience, this what has worked. And then you put it as a framework, as a contribution. And we all understand that's how to act in this difficult space. And it's controversial, and you said it's changing, it's being transformed, redefined. So am I correct or not?
Yes, absolutely. But I don't know what those answers are going to be.
No, nobody
but
knows.
We will find out. We'll find out from people themselves, from their lived experiences.
So we are defining allyship. We don't know yet what is.
No, we don't know.
We don't know.
In this
we are
context.
about to define it. Yes.
Yes, in higher education in this context, because it's not. It's for the educators to work in a rich collegial environment that is, exciting. It's we spend most of our time at work and most of our time at home writing papers, or it's such a big part of our lives. So we want to be allies to each other in enriching that space and challenging in ways that are strengths-based. And for the students, most of them are adults who have families and lives and businesses and a world of experience. And I don't feel we listen enough to them. So if they can help reveal markers of allyship, then we can create that story that you were talking about and generate the framework that could be transferable to other contexts. Originally, my initial expression of interest was to do the study with Australia, based at CDU and in Lethbridge in Canada, but I soon realised that was too big. But I think if we realise that contexts are different, one size does not fit all. I think that there is some scalability for that framework, and there are lots of informants on how to work ethically in that space. But let's give the voice to the educators and the students themselves.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
I might just jump in there if there's no other further comment. That's a nice segue with the ethics comment, Joanne. we all know, I think that inside out, I think what a real take-home message for me, for you, is this tension between insider and outsider. I think it's pretty obvious today that you're surrounded by friends in a really comfortable space. People know you, people know how you work. That's not going to be enough.
Yeah.
Having good intentions and being kind and being compassionate is really important, but then there needs to be something else. And that was an opportunity for you today to describe what that looked like. I think you started off with the acknowledgement of the country, all your stuff about your relationship, and then it would have been fantastic then for you then to start describing your position in the research. And that insider-outsider tension, which is a ton of research on. Also around the fact that what is an ally? A definition of allyship. I know you're coming up, that's one of the research outcomes, if you like, but there's plenty of literature in other contexts which defines allyship. I've read the document and in the hour or so that we've been here today, but I'll still be walking out of here without a real clear definition of what allyship is, despite the fact that I'm in this space. So I think your relationship and then your position in the research, you represent the colonisers. You, like myself and a lot of people in the room, represent 220 years of exploitation of Aboriginal people in this space, and for no benefit to Aboriginal populations. So after your positionality around, well, I am a coloniser and this is the strategies that I'm going to put in place so I don't perpetuate the mistakes of those before me, which I think is really important. Go and lean on those two documents which are kind of cut and pasted, the one from AITSIS and the one from NHMRC. They're key guiding documents. The first topic is, the first guideline is do no harm. The second is how do Aboriginal people, what do they get out of the research? What is their benefit? And if you center yourself on that, I think the rest of it, all your relationship and your good intention, all the rest of that stuff will be a really safe place that you can create. So I guess that's probably the takeaway message for me. Fantastic piece of research, which you've got brilliant support around you, and I've got absolutely looking forward to how all this unfolds. I guess my question, there's a couple of statements. My question is around your positionality of being a non-Indigenous researcher. I'm going to challenge you on this because I sat in that space and I still do. I do research with Aboriginal people being a non-Indigenous person. It's a challenging space. Your methodology is sound, Claire's 100% right. How do you then, with your data analysis, whether it be with the interviews or the body language stuff, with your analysis, how do you stop it becoming your interpretation through a European lens, which then gives all that really rich data one big whitewash, and we've gone away from Indigenous voice, and now how do we stop that data analysis being whitewashed in relation to all that rich data that you're going to collect?
Well, we'll have an advisory board, advisory committee, and that will work with me and also Curtis Ronan to keep everything in check there. Also, the iterations of what I find, there's going to be a lot of processes which engage the participants in checking what it is through the hermeneutics, because there's so many interpretations of interpretations of interpretations, I need to keep checking in with them as to what it is they want to, is that what they're wanting to say? And I will also check in with my analysis with them as well. And this is very much a part of what that art process is about. It's about that summative experience, which may generate new data as well, but it's all about pulling everybody and everything together and going over the information and checking in.
Is there any other questions or comments?
But it's challenging and it will be ongoing.
Yeah, that's right. And this is a really significant step for you in your process, and it's a safe space for you. But that will be a challenge for you, and your results, your data will become eroded if it becomes in danger of being whitewashed. And given the fact that you're looking in that space of being an ally, in allyship, decolonialised research is going to be absolutely key to the strength of the study, and that's easier said than done.
It is, and I'm just fortunate that I've got a lot of good people on board to keep me, I guess, grounded in that space. And it's also why critical race theory is critical, particularly to the space, but also to this topic, and those interrupting tools with the participants, and that constant checking in, and that constant, I guess, with the auto-ethnographic voice, my part of it, weaving throughout the telling of and the sharing of the research, is constant checking in with my own bias, and that's just embedded within that process of the method. So I've tried to pull together tools and strategies, but it isn't until I get right in there that I'm going to, come face to face with, with these challenges and look for ways to navigate through them ethically.
It's an exciting space because we've also got Michelle Hogue, who's an international leader in allied relationships and allyship in education. And as a Native American woman, Native Canadian, I'm sorry Michelle if I've described you wrongly, but we've got a suite of people, Larrakia and a world leader in allied practices to guide this study as well.
Did you have a comment, Michelle?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. I mean, I think it's a really, really important question. And we've talked a lot about this, Joanne and I, but Robin as well, and Joelle. What is it like to be an ally in this space? And I think, as Sue was saying, the autoethnographic part of this is going to be really, really important. It might not be easy work, and it might actually go south. It could, I mean, that's one of the outcomes that can happen when you're working in this complicated space. But I really do, as an Indigenous person, have to acknowledge that it is a really difficult task, and to have people, Indigenous people, be able to have their voice heard in a way that hopefully the outcomes of this will happen, I think is really, really important. And as Joanne said, developing a framework is key, but it's not a one-size-fits-all. What works in Larrakia country is not going to work in Lethbridge, in Treaty 7 territory where I am. But there are some similarities, and so, having those conversations, I think, are really important. Allyship and being in this space is really messy business. And we sometimes have to agree to disagree on some things, but I think it's going to be a challenge, but I think it's going to be a really important challenge, because to write from your perspective about what this work is like, Joanne, in relationship to your Indigenous participants, I think is going to be a key outcome of this work. Because one of the questions is, how do we do this? And this might lend a little bit of a lens to that.
Thanks, Michelle. Is there any other comment, questions? Otherwise,
I just wanted to make one comment, please. First of all, I'd just like to say, Joanne, it's a really interesting project and really important as well, I feel. You've obviously got a lot of experience working with Aboriginal people, and that will come, that's sort of pretty evident, I suppose anyway. But will you be exploring the space, say, in higher education allyship, where a person identifies as an Indigenous person, but their supervisor or lecturer is unaware that they are Indigenous.
Sorry, was that a comment, Alexandra? Or?
Yeah, and a question. Will she be looking at that area at all about whether the people that she's working with at the university and the lecturers and the supervisors are actually aware that that person is Indigenous, and how does that change the way the relationship between those two people that are totally unaware of what the other knows about their backgrounds? How does that change the whole situation?
Alexandra, I'm so sorry. I don't quite understand. Are you talking about PhD students or?
No, I'm talking more about supervisors and lecturers, and there's been a lot of work with CDU, EDU, I mean CDU.
Yeah.
It's the place to go if you want to do something about in this space for Indigenous studies, and you're obviously coming in from a different area. You're non-Aboriginal, so I'm thinking, okay, you've got experience working with Aboriginal people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what is it? So what happens to those people who are Aboriginal? They go into university. They're working with supervisors. They're mixing with other students. And obviously, the students and the supervisors and the lecturers are all trying to develop this allyship. But what happens if you don't even look Aboriginal? That's what I mean. Certainly, that's going to have some sort of an effect on that relationship.
It does. I think that's actually out of the scope of this study, but it is a really important question to investigate. But I guess it's whether that person chooses to identify as an Indigenous person, and where their higher education identity sits within that as well, and how they then relate to and navigate with their supervisors and their environment. The scope of the study is confined to inviting 10 participants who are Indigenous students at higher education, who I know or have had a connection with or ongoing connection with, and 10 academic educators. But the students are the centre, so those academic educators, some will be Indigenous and others will not. So unfortunately that's out of the scope, but I hope somebody picks that up, or maybe that's the next PhD, I don't know.
I think we'll wrap that up at this point. I'd like to wish you all the very best with the studies. The panel will have a little meeting now and get some feedback too. But on behalf of everyone, I'd like to give you a big round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yay, Brown!
Thanks for joining us online. Thank you so much.